Welcome to the Beehive, where we turn business and financial buzz into actionable insights. My name is William, and I'll be your host for today. Today, we initiate a series focused on risk advisory services. In an era defined by rapid change and increasing complexity, effective risk management is no longer a mere compliance function, but a strategic imperative.
Absolutely, William. The ability for us to navigate uncertainty and build resilience is one of the most important pillars for our organizational success.
Understanding and managing risk is a complex endeavor. It requires a deep understanding of an organization's operations, industry dynamics, and regulatory environment.
This is where risk advisory services would come in. By providing expert guidance and support, we help organizations identify, assess, and mitigate risks that could impact their operations.
Yes, and joining me today is Matthew Gopez, a seasoned professional with extensive experience in risk advisory. As the Senior Manager of Risk Advisory at Scrubbed, Matt brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our discussions.
Thank you, William. I'm eager to collaborate with you and share my insights, my humble insights at that, regarding the subject matter that we're talking about for today.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Matt. Well, before anything else, can you talk us through your experience of being a senior manager?
I've been in the industry for almost 8 years now. 5 years focusing on providing consulting and internal audit support for publicly listed entities and as well as private entities. I've been serving the professional services community with PCAOB integrated audits, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, technical accounting on the side, and mostly serving the life sciences industry, manufacturing, retail, and different commercial industries as well. So I hope to share at least a breadth and depth of my experience to some of our listeners for today.
Amazing. Wow. Well, our inaugural episode today focuses on building a culture of control. We'll be discussing how organizations can enhance their resilience and adaptability through effective internal controls.
At least to provide an introduction, I believe we're going to talk about control environment, consciousness of control as part of our culture or an integral part of our behaviors as an organization, and how it relates to basically mitigating the risks of today that our businesses would usually face.
Wow. All right. To delve deeper into this topic, we have invited Jizzalyn Cruz, a risk advisory expert with a proven track record in SOX compliance audit.
I'm excited to learn from Giza what is currently the trends and setup or status quo of our companies in terms of their acceptance with internal controls as a concept of the business.
Hello, Jizzalyn. Welcome to the Beehive, and we're delighted to have you join us today.
Thank you, William and Matt. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah, so can you talk us through a little bit about your background in risk advisory?
Well, I've been in the profession for 8 years now. I started my career in the external audit field, but for my last 5 years of experience, I've been focusing my experience on SOX audit and risk advisory services.
Wow. All right, let's get into it, right? Let's start with the basics. For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, what exactly is internal controls?
All right, let's start with the basic definition of internal controls. So internal controls are policies, procedures, or processes which companies or organizations implement mainly to safeguard their assets, ensure the reliability of their financial reporting, and enhance the efficiency of their operations. Internal controls also minimizes risks, as mentioned by Matt before. It also encourage adherence to policies and compliance with rules and regulations.
Well, to provide a more specific and targeted view about internal controls, how does this actually translate to the everyday operations of the company?
I think to preface the conversation as we dive deeper into the concepts of internal control, what is important is that we should realize that internal controls is a concept that is dynamically evolving across the different levels of the organization. When we talk about internal controls at executive or at an executive level, say, board of directors or senior management level, we're talking about internal controls as a concept of ensuring that there is promulgation of his honesty and integrity in the workplace. Let's say it's more of really what Giza has said, policies and procedures, reminders, or even announcements that would basically encourage the conduct of business dealings with honesty and integrity as paramount or core values.
Yeah, so this is the high level.
Right. This is a high level or entity level, as we would like to call it. And then as we go along, as we go down to the different functions, different reporting lines, let's say supervisor, staff, manager level, and different functions such as operations, finance, HR, and IT, we dive deeper into the process level of internal controls, even at task level. We're talking about segregation of duties. We're talking about basically safekeeping of our assets, related party disclosures, identification, and other concepts that might be specific towards the nuances or like the particular specific activities that are surrounding that particular department. So we are talking about process level tasks. We are talking about procedures rather than overall policies. And with that, we are evolving our consideration, what we call control attributes, towards the demand or the intended objective of that particular or those particular set of internal controls. So at the level of entity or at the high level, we're talking about awareness, whereas at the level of different functions, we are talking about mastery of steps and so on. So there are nuances basically. There are different demands as well with regard to the different activities that are set forth in each department.
Gotcha. And does this change with the on how big the company is? Would you say that is it the same? Is it the same difference with a startup company versus like a big corporation?
The different activities would definitely change in terms of its design because it needs to adapt to the circumstance of the business. Let's say if there is a business complexity, most probably there would be different steps that they should undertake. If the business is large, then most definitely departments would also be defined. There are certain groups that would have different responsibilities as well. There might be a delineation of responsibility that is normally being consolidated at a startup level. So definitely the activities would change, right? But the basic premise of internal control being a risk mitigating solution stays the same. So internal controls are established mainly because there is a risk or a problem statement that is being defined or being mitigated at that. And I think Giza would talk more about that on what is the role of internal controls in terms of risk mitigation. And perhaps maybe to provide more layer of understanding as to what are the different kinds of activity or types of internal control. I think Giza could share the different types of internal control perhaps.
Right, right. So for us to further visualize the concept of internal controls, so let me provide you with some actual controls that companies employ in their operations. So broadly speaking, internal controls can be categorized into either preventive, detective, or corrective. So let's start with the preventive ones. Examples of preventive controls would include setting up password configurations in order to basically prevent unauthorized access to the systems of the company in order to safeguard their data and sensitive information. Another example of a preventive control is ensuring that segregation of duties is in place within the operations of the organization, basically to prevent fraud. For instance, let's say that the physical custody of an asset, the record keeping of that asset, and the authorization for acquisition or disposal of that particular asset should be split among different personnel within the organization. So you'll see that the essence of these controls is to deter the occurrence of error and fraud. All right? Then, on the other hand, moving on to the detective controls, examples of this would include simply simply performing accounts reconciliations to verify the accuracy of your transactions and to verify the validity per se of the transactions being recorded in the financials of the organization. Another example is the performance of either a quarterly or annual inventory count of the, let's say, a manufacturing corporation in order to verify whether their inventory records are accurate or to check their inventory levels. That can also impact not only the financial aspect side but also the operational side, since
Right.
yeah, right. Since the decision making depends on these inventory levels that the company has in terms of acquisition, production, or even sales, right? So we'll see that the essence of these controls are to identify or expose misstatements or errors or undesirable events that have already occurred in the business. And then lastly, we have the corrective ones, like having disaster recovery plans in case of like any emergency or attacks in the systems of the organization, basically to mitigate its impact or effect in the operations of the company. And then another example would be simply deploying or setting up a routinary backups to prevent data loss in case of any system failures, virus attacks, power interruptions, or even natural disasters. So, yeah, those are some of the examples of the different categories of internal controls. While some of these may sound like simple, like performing reconciliations, I know most of our listeners are surely familiar with this, but collectively, these internal controls serve as the backbone of a well-run business.
Thanks for that, Giza. And I think just to add, what I would like to focus on is the idea that each system of internal control for every business is unique in its sense because they have different activities, different control owners, different structure of leadership and reporting, and different circumstance, be it on a business level or on a financial reporting level. But I think what's important is that there is a framework that they should follow, and this particular framework is something that is selected by the senior management or those charged with governance. And I think that's an important step in implementing internal controls in every organization. Basically selecting a recognized internal control framework in which they could base the establishment of their internal control. So let's say one company might have 180 key controls or like 200 key controls, but the overarching principle to that is that they complied with an established internal control framework that can be a common language across all stakeholders. The advantage of that, and I believe we will discuss it later, is that we are increasing confidence of investors and other stakeholders that we speak the same language in terms of what we are considering as risks and what are the common activities that we need to do in order for us to say that we have effective system of internal controls.
Yeah, seems like there's a lot of thought and detail put into these. There's a lot of categories and branches even. But I wonder, because in the eyes of an outsider, this is technically all almost invisible.
Right.
So I want to know what does it look like if internal controls, well, in the worst case scenario, fail?
I would say that the first failure that we are actually experiencing in terms of internal control is lack of a strategic focus in terms of employing or understanding the implications of risk in general and understanding that internal controls could actually help us achieve the objectives of the business. We're so focused with internal controls, or we're so focused with our activities per se, to achieve our objectives, that we only ask the question, what should go right? And that's usually the basic like instinct of business owners, CEOs alike, or those charged with governance. We operate our business with the premise to answer the question, what should go right, in order for us to basically achieve our objectives. But oftentimes, our leaders, our senior management would not be able to ask the question as well, what could go wrong? It helps to have a little bit of cynicism in our business operations because we have to check what could go wrong in the process. And these leaking faucets are what we call the risks per se. And as we have an effective system of internal control that also covers effective risk identification, we are able to identify and articulate basically what would be our risks, what could go wrongs, and from there we develop certain measures to ensure that those what could go wrongs may never go wrong, and
Preventive
hopefully
measures.
would
Yeah.
be prevented, detected, or corrected, as what Giza has said a while ago. Because it's never like a system of all preventive. Sometimes we can only enter the scene when we could only detect and correct it, right? So it really depends upon the circumstance and operations of the business. But that is the basic premise of why things go wrong with other business as well. Because as early as now, we are so focused with doing or basically performing activities about what should go right, we forget that we should also ask the question to all our stakeholders as to whether what could go wrong.
Yeah. And I think this is basically why internal controls are essential for every business, you would say. Yeah, but now I want to speak on the topic of culture of control, right? So I'm asking the question of how does a culture of control fit into this whole conversation that we have?
Mhm. A culture of control is about cultivating a deep-rooted understanding of internal controls, not just as a set of rules, but a strategic tool to safeguard the business, enhance efficiency of the operation, and ultimately drive the growth of the operation. So a culture of control is not just mere procedural adherence, but it is a mindset that should be ingrained in every level of the organization.
Gotcha. But first, I want to know again, what is the can you tell me in a very dictionary term what is the meaning of culture of control?
I think culture of control also could be defined as control consciousness, basically, right? And control consciousness basically defines the environment in which we are operating. Because culture, as we would like to define it, is behavior, the collective behavior of a particular group, right? And the culture of control talks about the unified behavior of a particular group or an organization that is focused mostly in treating control not just an obligation or just a thing that they should do, but rather a strategic tool, rather, that, as what Gisa have said, in order to drive success and drive operational efficiency, fair financial reporting, and compliance to regulations in a particular business. And control consciousness always follows risk awareness. So for as long as the organization basically has best practices or effective practices in terms of identifying, prioritizing, and responding to risks, then most probably the practical solution to that, or the practical next step to that, is that they employ a system of internal controls and they train themselves to foster a positive culture of control or control consciousness, per se.
So it's the environment.
Right, it is an environment.
So, Gisa, you have said that it's a mindset that should be ingrained at every organizational level, right? So even up to the rank and file the rank and file employees of the organization. Does that include them, or?
Yes, definitely they include them. Employees from top management up to the frontline staff or the rank and file employees of the organization should grasp the significance of their role in preserving the integrity of the operations. Employees should be empowered to contribute to the control framework, and identify risks, suggest improvements to the operations, and own their control responsibilities. This additional ownership fosters also a sense of sensitivity, accountability, and responsibility at each level of the organization.
And why is that? So you're saying that there should be an active participation from all levels, right? And is that pivotal to the need of a culture of control?
Definitely. Because a culture of control ultimately is a unified commitment to risk management. And as Matt mentioned, in internal audit, we define risk as a threat. These threats are either events, actions, or non-actions that adversely affect the organization's ability to execute their strategies successfully and ultimately achieve their business objectives. So, a culture of control is about embedding a proactive risk
To condense that, like you're speaking to a 7-year old, like you're speaking to me as a 7-year old. Is there a more basic manner um, of explanation for that?
I think I've seen a video in LinkedIn about the concept of risk management in general. There was a kid, and that particular kid is on top of the bed, and the bed is like I think 3 feet tall, and then the kid is not tall, right? So he's just a teeny tiny baby, teeny tiny toddler. He's about to go and try to check whether he could jump, he could probably step down from the bed. They say that that particular step of trying to assess whether they could just stand, hang at the edge of the bed or on the edge of the bed, and then try to check if they could basically like reach the floor by extending their feet. That's risk mitigation or risk management in general. They're trying to assess whether am I gonna get hurt? Am I gonna get injured in the process of me trying to go down from the bed, right? So the objective is to go down at the bed. The risk management there is trying to assess whether I could get hurt
Yeah.
in the process of going down. And the control activity there is the step that he would probably do in order for him to successfully go down and achieve
Jumping or
his
through a
objective.
ladder.
Yeah. Am I going to put a pillow there so that I could jump and so on? So basically that particular thought process, it happens from one process at every department, at every function that there is. And those particular thought process, I assume there would be hundreds or thousands of them in a particular organization, would basically paint the picture of how effective your internal controls design would be. And the challenge there is for us to consistently perform that. That's why it's important for us to document it through policies and procedures, because as we articulate our control design, it's also important to ensure that it is implemented across and it is consistently applied as we have eventually or originally designed it to happen.
Well, it sounds to me like this is not a static concept, no, but it's like it's a dynamic force that drives continuous improvement and sustainable success.
It definitely is a dynamic force, Giza, no? So I would also like to ask, maybe try to drive as well the concept of what are we gaining from internal controls in general? What would be the benefits that we have to know as business owners or important stakeholders of every organization that we are in about the benefits of, gaining a control conscious mindset or adopting a culture of control in our organization. Giza, we've talked about all of the concepts regarding internal control as a risk mitigating action or solution, but I wanted to focus on how are we going to set up internal control and the benefits of adopting a culture of control in every business or every organization?
Well, the benefits of implementing internal controls would also be related to the objectives of the internal controls itself. So, a strong culture of control can first and foremost enhance the efficiency of the operations. It can mitigate risk. It can enhance the accuracy and reliability of the financial reporting. And in relation to that, it can also boost the morale of the employees. And importantly, it can enhance the reputation of the organization.
All right. William, I think you have a question regarding challenges, or what is your takeaway with regard to, the benefits of internal control?
Yeah, because even though there are great benefits, we know that implementing a culture of control, isn't always easy. I want to know what are some common challenges businesses face, and maybe how can they be addressed.
Yeah, so implementing internal controls can really be a hard nut to crack. Some of the common challenges faced by organization is lack of employee buy-in,
It's alright. Take a breather.
resource allocation, and basically employees not being aware what is the importance of internal controls itself. So to overcome these challenges, it is essential to communicate the value of implementing it per se to the employees of the organization. And then we need to involve the employees as well in the implementation itself and provide them with the proper training and support so that they can be successful in implementing it. And most importantly, for our top management or our top leaders to really lead as an example.
I think to double down on the message of Giza as well, the risk management and internal controls is highly dependent on creative resource allocation. We know that resources are finite because of money, time constraint, and as well as human resource constraint. We could only have so many people to perform some internal control activities, right? And the concept of us doing risk management or risk advisory in general is to make sure that we are allocating these resources to the things that should matter the most in every organization. But I think the most important problem that we should face is basically the resistance of our people towards change, and as well as the lack of interest for people because they don't understand not only what is currently being implemented but how it is going to be implemented and why is it being implemented. So the messaging towards articulating the value of implementing internal control is a primary activity that should be focused on and invested by the organization. And just like what Giza has said, some of the solutions really would include resource allocation even at the awareness level and making sure that our top management has the front face towards implementing these particular steps.
Amazing. To make it sound like your analogy earlier, if the boy is at the top of the bed trying to jump in, then maybe the top management or the top level is the parent trying to instruct the boy.
Yeah, basically. So, not only instructing them at the onset, principle-wise, they should have had, previous conversations with that boy. Like, hey, it's important to keep yourself safe, or it's important to keep yourself really aware about what should be done, or what do you need to do in order for you to safely go down the bed, and so on, diba?
I love that. So, well, that's good and all, but how does I want to jump into the next topic, right? So I want to know how does building a culture of control contribute to future-proofing a business? Because you talked a lot about how important it is and how pivotal it is actually in running a business from top management up until to rank and file. And so how does this contribute to making your company so much better in the future?
Well, let me start the discussion for this topic. So the current business landscape is marked by increased volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So a culture of control is really essential to navigate these challenges and for businesses to thrive. By fostering a culture of control, businesses can proactively manage and mitigate risk. They can seize emerging opportunities from the market and build a resilience in an ever-changing environment. A, con- a strong control environment empowers employees and leaders to make sound decisions and set a solid foundation for future growth, success, and resilience.
Wow. So that's a very compelling argument. I think it's clear that a culture of control is no longer just about risk mitigation, but it's so much more than that. It's about empowering organizations to be proactive and agile, all those things.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our next question. All right. We've talked about benefits.
Uh-huh.
We talked about challenges.
Yeah.
Now I think it's time for us to give a little bit to our listeners about what would be our sound advice for them as next steps that they could do in order for them to succeed and in order for them to incorporate the concepts of internal control to future-proof their business,
Yeah.
right? So what are the best practices that maybe we have experienced in the past or we usually provide our clients that they should do? Hot topics perhaps of some activities that, they should look into before going down to the hygiene details of what internal control should be in their organization.
Right, right. So here are few key recommendations for best practices of implementing your internal controls. So first is to regularly perform your risk assessment. By knowing the risk landscape of your business, you're able to prioritize
Key
you're able
risk,
to
right?
prioritize key risk, yeah, and implement control activities to mitigate those and efficiently allocate your resources to prioritize those risks.
Right.
Next is to
Wait, let me stop you right there because I want to know more about how regular should that risk assessment be performed. Should it be performed at an annually or maybe monthly, quarterly? What would you say is the best way to go about this?
It's an iterative process, right? At every step of the way, we should assess the risk. The formal risk assessment, though, could happen on an annual basis. Normally, firms, either listed or privately owned, they do have a session with their board of directors that they do discuss business risk, financial reporting risk, regulatory risk in general, which risks are applicable, what is the heat map or heat rating of those particular risks, which risks are critical, which risks could take the back seat perhaps for this year because it's a risk that is assessed to be low in terms of probability and low in terms of magnitude or impact. But normally we do advise our clients to perform it on an annual basis at least. If we are seeing different changes or like multiple and significant changes in the business landscape, let's say we are experiencing a significant overturn in the industry, then most probably what we are going to recommend to them is that they perform it on a quarterly basis.
And does that happen always? Does that always happen?
Well, the changes per se is not usually happening, but it's important for us to be mindful or cognizant that business changes could be introduced, not only by the industry but also in the world in general. Political changes could happen. These particular risks are being considered in our risk assessment. So if we are anticipating, or not even anticipating, if we are just making sure that we are at least lukewarm to the idea that there is a business change or there is a change that would happen that would impact our operations, then we must consider it, identify that particular change, and discuss it accordingly. Communication should happen all throughout, and I think that's the primary principle that all leaders should follow in every organization, that whenever there is a business change, documentation of that particular discussion must happen. And in documenting that particular discussion, we are also inspired to follow a scientific method of discussing the impact of it and how should we respond to those particular risks.
Yeah. All right, that's amazing. So moving on to the next best
thank you
practice.
for that additional information, Matt. Appreciate that one. All right, moving on to my next recommendation is to develop a clear policies and procedures for the company. a comprehensive and easily understandable guidelines is is providing a framework for the employees to follow, which reduces ambiguity in the process and reduces also risks.
Mm-hmm.
Next is to consider technological integration because automation really enhances the efficiency of your operations by reducing human errors, um, improving accuracy, and it frees up your resources for more value-adding activities.
Right.
Does this include like AI? Do you think in recent years?
Definitely. I think one of the focus right now of risk advisory in general is not just to mitigate any risk that is existing, because that's the risk management perspective of it. Certain topics we would discuss as well in the near future would also include integrating automation or process automation in general as an objective of risk advisory, because we are touching efficiency. We are touching basically eliminating certain dead end or bottlenecks in the process as we introduce automation, right? And there's always a certain balance that we will strike whenever we consider certain decisions to automate, because risk management should also be a concept that is considered while we are considering automation. But right now, I think the trend that Giza is explaining is that as we continue to understand risk management approach, we should not just be boxed on the certain ideas that we have to do internal controls as an obligation, or like as something that is very red tapey, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
for or very documentation heavy for the business. We should also consider the facet of automation or information technology as an important consideration in developing internal controls.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Gisa.
All right, thanks for that. So for my next recommendation, so this is an important one. To continuously monitor and evaluate the design and operating effectiveness of your controls. So this includes using key performance indicators, performing regular or annual reviews, and analyzing your data to identify patterns and trends. This evaluation process is also essential to identify potential control weaknesses or areas of improvement in your processes.
I think what Giza is explaining also there is that management can have their activities to assess internally the design and operating effectiveness, meaning they can perform their own assessment, their own monitoring there. Sometimes the challenge there is that management or internal audit function of a company in general would not have the competency or the resource to perform those particular testing, and sometimes it might be costly for them to have internal hire or like reshuffle their functions in order for them to cater to that particular objective. I have seen clients have those particular predicament in their business operations. That's why they have resulted to outsourcing their internal audit function or internal control function being second line of defense or third line of defense. And this most probably would help them in terms of resource management while basically achieving their objective of monitoring the effectiveness of their internal controls.
Would you say is that a better solution for it? Outsourcing risk management.
It's not a one size fits all solution, but it's definitely a solution that they can assess to be effective, because if they have the resources and they have the competency, most probably a vetting process of their management assessment is what is just needed. But if they really have a challenge in terms of employee turnover or like resource management, being that all of them are preparers and nobody assesses the compliance to certain regulatory requirements regarding internal control, or even just the operating effectiveness of their internal controls, then definitely outsourcing or co-sourcing these particular functions either at second line of defense or third line of defense is something that they should take a look into.
Yeah, so this monitoring and assessment that you've said is on the management level up.
Yes.
Is there any process or anything that rank and file level can file?
Right. While the monitoring rests with the ultimate responsibility of management, be it at the internal controls department or second line of defense, or at the internal audit department or third line of defense, they could always utilize resources under the rank and file in order for them to perform their testing, such as performing the usual validation or performance of review procedures that is ultimately done by management in general. So there is a mix of resources that internal controls or internal audit could actually utilize for them to achieve their objectives of monitoring not only the design effectiveness but also the operating effectiveness of their internal controls.
So basically, it's continuous support to management.
It is a continuous and as well as a holistic support to management assessment. Yeah.
Gotcha on that one. Right. So I think, is there any more best practices that you can give us, Jizzalyn?
Yeah. For my last key recommendation for best practices is to tie the internal control performance and control effectiveness result to basically performance management
Oh, that
or
is great. That is great.
rewards or incentive programs of the company, right? Because recognizing employees who demonstrate strong control practices can motivate other employees as well and can further motivate desired results for internal control implementation.
Can you? This is a very nice best practice, but can you concise it more into the analogy earlier, wherein the boy jumps from the bed? How would this best practice develop into that analogy?
I'm not sure if we could tie up different objectives for a kid. Most probably if the main incentive for the kid is basically to achieve its objectives, right? Defining that particular objective is important for different businesses. So let's say operations group might have KPIs in terms of operational excellence and as well as, let's say, revenue generation, for example, right? And management or top level strategic management could always look into developing a healthy balance of pushing for revenue generation and as well as compliance to internal controls that they have established in order for them to motivate and reward employees that are meeting both criteria. What we're saying is that as we continue to evolve the company's internal control policies and as well as consideration for risk management in general, maybe what they could do is take a look into what motivates employees to cover all bases. And that basis can be both revenue generation and as well as adherence to internal controls or focus on operational excellence, for example.
And do you think that this key practice is not done enough by a lot of companies?
I think it's done by a lot of companies which are mature because they are currently at a process of making sure that they are addressing crisis in terms of their processes. And normally that's a general flow of business expectation that coming from a place of immense growth, they are trying to stabilize their operations by addressing certain crises that they are facing due to changes. That's a positive problem, right? We just wanted maybe to educate our management or leaders of businesses of today to already consider internal controls in growing their businesses. As we continuously scale, we can not only focus on driving the growth of our businesses at the revenue side, but we could also make sure that we are taking care of the operation so as not to put our businesses at a crisis wherein we have to put out fires. So it's important for them to always understand these concepts hand in hand, that while we are driving growth, we can also drive standardization. We can also drive making sure that we are mitigating risk at every step of the way.
So these best practices are a fantastic way to wrap up our questions. I mean, for our last segment, can you share with our listeners why business owners and organizational leaders should invest in building a strong internal control culture now?
Right. Now is the time to shift our focus from what can go right to what can go wrong and
Correct.
start thinking that internal controls are not just compliance checklists, but they are the bedrock for a successful business. by implementing a control environment or a robust control framework, you are not just complying with regulations, but safeguarding your business reputation, protecting your assets, and optimizing your operations. So with this, I would like to invite our business owners and our organizational leaders to start identifying your organization's critical risks. Conduct a thorough assessment of your processes and your systems in order to pinpoint vulnerabilities and prioritize actions based on potential impact and likelihood of occurrence. And always remember that prevention is always cheaper than remediation. So now is the time to invest on employee trainings, leverage on technology, and foster a culture of control within the organization. By taking these proactive steps now, you are laying the foundation for long-term success and long-term resilience.
Amazing. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today exploring the critical importance of building a culture of control within organizations. Jizzalyn, thank you for your time. You have provided us invaluable insights into the challenges and opportunities in this area.
I believe our key takeaway right now is that it's clear that a strong internal control framework is essential for a sustainable success of business organization and any business organization at that. By establishing this particular culture, organizations can enhance their resilience, sustainability with their operations, and protect their reputation at best. All right.
Yeah, so again, thank you, Jizzalyn, and thank you, Matt, for being today's guest of this podcast episode number 1. We hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways.
And special thanks to our listeners for today for tuning in. We hope this episode has provided you with everything that you would need from us. And hopefully this starts a conversation with our listeners. Drive your thoughts to some of our stakeholders or some of your colleagues and start the conversation with internal controls as the main focus of your topics.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast for future episodes where we'll continue to explore the world of risk advisory and delve into other critical business topics.
Until next time, this is Matt.
This is Jizzalyn.
And I'm William. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.